Welcome back, everyone, to yet another episode of Sabres Chat with myself, Luka. This is not a happy episode. This is not an episode that, to begin this season, I imagined would be making, I wanted to be making, of course. But the reality is, this is an episode that I hit record not even 30 minutes after the end of the Sabres Stars game, where this team, this organization, found itself now in 13 seasons of no playoffs. Officially, the drought continues. I've seen others tweet it, but if there's something Buffalo sports knows very well, it's long playoff droughts. And where in the NFL at the time, six made the playoffs, and the Bills really never had many teams, if any at all, really. There was the one that lost to the depth Steelers, although it turned out all of those second and third stringers were very good. But with that, it was only six teams in a conference made the playoffs, four obviously winning the division and two wild cards. Um, the Sabres are in a league in the NHL where eight teams make the playoffs out of each conference, three from each division, and then two, of course, of the next best in the wild card slots. And somehow, some way, when half of a conference makes the playoffs, this team, this organization has found its way into over a decade in now 13 seasons to not make the playoffs. Last year, they missed by a point and things were exciting. This year, there's maybe a chance they miss by 1, 2, 3 points. I say maybe because the underlying point, the main point on what went wrong, what happened that had this team with all the hope and promise going into the year fall flat on its face was they were consistently inconsistent, and somehow they found themselves or find themselves right now 37 and 5. And if that isn't just a perfect example, the moment they get eliminated from the playoffs, they are literally 500. Now, the NHL 500 is not true 500 because if you add those five overtime losses, that obviously makes them have more losses than wins. But in NHL terms, in hockey terms, that is 500. And they truly struggled so hard to string together wins. And it's just painful where they gave us a little bit of a late hope. You beat the Flames, you come back home, you have the worst game against the Senators where that happened. But then all of a sudden you come back and beat the Devils. You lose to the Leafs in awful fashion. Then you beat the Caps, you beat the Flyers, you're beating teams you need to in order to jump over them. You go into this must-win game against the Red Wings, a Sunday matinee matchup. And to say they fell flat is an understatement. They didn't even show up for the first 10 minutes, of course. And just as they had come off back-to-back wins and they could get three in a row in this big game that matters. And I wish I could give credit to the individual who published it, but when they finally found themselves within 4 points of a playoff spot for the first time in what felt like a long time this season, they fell flat. They looked horrible. They got one goal after conceding three and just couldn't break through after that. And again, they were within 4 points of a playoff spot, and I apologize that I can't give credit where credit is due, but that made this team 0-4 and have a awful goal differential in games this season whenever this team was within 4 points of a playoff spot. One, it's pathetic that they only played 4 games within 4 points. That means 2 games to make up of a playoff spot. And two, the fact that you could never show up in those games, regardless of where they are in the season, is equally as pathetic. And this miserable, depressing as a fan season. Now, overall, life is life. This is just fandom talk, but it's just absolutely sad that a team with hope and potential could fall so short of the expectations that I believe most Sabres fans, if not all, had. Even national pundits and other podcasts and things like that, of course, had expectations for this team that they fell so short on. In the other ironic part, not only to say that they went 37-37-5 at this point, the other ironic part of it all is the biggest question mark going into the year was goaltending. What are we going to do about goaltending? Oh, are we going to trade for Hellebuck? Apologize. Are we going to move for another number one goalie? What are we going to do? Is Levi truly going to live up to the expectations? None of those things happened. And yet they actually found the answer in goaltending, and UPL finally found his form as a starter in this league and was great come 2024. And really kind of is the backbone and reason for why this team was still in contention even late in this season, because even my last episode, which is going way back, weeks, if not over a month, I'm almost positive it's over a month ago. It was, where did it go wrong, essentially? And somehow, some way, between that episode and now, they were not yet officially eliminated. Thank you, UPL, for finding form, because no one that was skating out could figure things out. Tage of late was starting to look a little bit more again like himself. And I will say the only skater this season that I truly will not put any disappointment with and feel that they themselves have still been what we expect them to be. He could have been better point production wise overall, but I think I'll call it satisfied with how he played overall this year, all things considered, with the supporting cast around him. Rasmus Dahlin. That is the only skater on this entire roster that I will genuinely say I am not upset with overall. He hit 20 goals tonight against Dallas, something that a Sabres defenseman hasn't done in a long time. Congrats to him. And I'm sure he doesn't give a flying shit about that at this moment in time, because they are officially eliminated and he cares. He wants to be here. He is potentially the next captain of this team now that Kyle Okposo is no longer here and the C is vacant. And he doesn't care that he hit a milestone for this organization and had still a great year. Great might be inadequate, an above adequate year. And hit, that 20 goal mark is nothing to sneeze at, but it is just pathetic that he is the only one. Tage, you can give some excuses for injuries, things like that. Hard to find form on a regular occurrence. Tuck, somewhat similar. He did get hurt at one point. Realistically, he is your point leader at this moment in time. So that's something to say when everyone else around you is having down times. Skinner, of course, had a big down drip, although this isn't the first time we've seen that for whatever reason it's been in his career. There's also a reason that he's played over 1,000 games in his career and yet has never even sniffed the playoffs. I think the underlying issue and the underlying conversation that is going to begin at this moment in time, and this is going to be a brief episode, I'm going to say, but just to go back to it, the underlying issue and the biggest discussion that should be had, that will be had, and I know the media, of course, has already been dealing with it through Twitter and everything else, and I imagine he has been dealing with it behind closed doors, if not also in the public presence, of course, is what are we doing with coaching? What is going on behind the bench? And is Don Granato what we need him to be anymore? Is there something better out there? And it's justified because I talked about the recent games, of course. Now, tonight's effort, apologies, tonight's effort, I will say, does not apply to this, as they did come out firing. They didn't have the shot totals. They only had 5, I believe, in the first period, but at least they found the back of the net early to have that 2-1 lead going into the second, which they inevitably blew and couldn't find the back of the net one more time and lost 3-2. But going back one more game, going back to the Sunday game, that start felt too familiar. And I feel like when you see teams come out flat, come out what looks to be either sleepwalking, unprepared, a combination of the two, something else, whatever it might be, when a team regularly starts slow, the Detroit game, the Devils game can even be put in that category. The Senators game, just the craziness of allowing 4 goals within the opening 10 minutes. Holy shit. Have I never seen anything like that before in an NHL game? I think coaching is a massive question mark for that, because clearly this team is not focused, motivated, and ready to go the moment the first puck drops. The responsibility of that, you want players to have that own internal drive, of course, but the main responsibility of being ready, being prepared, and being from the get-go ready to play whoever it is across from you, regardless of where they are in the standings, is on the coaching staff and the head coach mainly, of course, because the head coach is the one who reflects all of coaching. And Don Granato just hasn't had this team ready for vital games down the stretch. And I know that it was a long shot to make the playoffs, even at that point when they were playing that Senators game, the Devils game, so on and so forth, these recent games. But there were chances, and the league was doing a hell of a job. The rest of the East was doing a great job in trying to keep them in, really. And it's funny because it's similar to what happened last season. The rest of the league is kind of stalling out, losing, and things like that. And it's just keeping the Sabres in. We had similar conversations last year where it's like, all right, they lose 10-4, whatever it was, to Dallas at home. It's over. No, it's not. Actually, they're still in it. Then they go to Florida and it's over. That was when it was finally over. Even before that, they have an embarrassing loss on a Tuesday night at home to Columbus, and it felt over, which then led into games where it wasn't. And I just genuinely believe this coaching staff has run its course, and I don't want to completely throw Don Granato under the bus. I don't think this team would be where it is when it comes to player development, when it comes to what we see out of Tage and his confidence, and Dylan Cousins last year, although this has been a very down year for him, as well as Owen Power. I think even though Jordan Greenway hasn't been great and everything, I still think what we have out of him is still something that is valuable in some way. It's not like he's a lock for the roster next year or anything like that, of course. Then is he in part of future plans? I have no idea. He would, I mean, it's Jordan Greenway. We're not talking about Rasmus Dahlin or Tage Thompson, the two only true untouchable pieces. Tuck is pretty much there as well, but never say never. Coaching just has hit a plateau. Don Granato has hit his peak. I think Don Granato is that guy who can come in, allow players to be comfortable, gain confidence, truly find their form, figure out who they are as a player, especially young ones, of course, and mold themselves into a higher level than what they were prior. I think Tage Thompson is, of course, the crown jewel of this example. I think Dahlin's development is a credit to this. I would have liked to have seen, and we would have all liked to have seen a major step happen from Owen Power. Unfortunately, it seems that he's taken a big step back, and that could also potentially be on coaching for different reasons. I think Power might need to be, I don't want to say taught as if he just has no idea, but guided in a direction that's different than the one he's currently being put in. I think his play style might need to be addressed and altered just a touch. Don't need him to be a goon, but you want him to learn how to better use his frame. I mean, yes, he skates phenomenally. He is one of the better skaters on this team, especially for his size, and it's a valuable asset to have. but you'd like him to play more physical in the defensive end. You'd like him to be more intimidating in the defensive end where teams need to adjust course for him in moments. Like Victor Hedman, I don't think is one you would say plays overly physical, but he knows when to do it when he needs to do it. And that's a key thing. I think there's plenty of those defensemen out there where they're not overly physical. I think Dahlin plays very physical, especially when needed. But on top of it, it's not like he's trying so hard to do so. He's not a Radko Gudas who's just that is his job. It's just a part of his game that he knows when to apply it. And I think Owen Power just truly looks lost on when that is necessary of him. And I think it's needed from him much more than what we're seeing at all. Well, primarily because we just barely see it, altogether. So coaching needs to be looked at and addressed. And if Kevin Adams is not willing to truly evaluate that, and in my eyes and in other fans' eyes, move on from Don Granato and that staff, I question where decisions are being made and how the evaluation process is truly happening. Because I think a competent GM would see what had occurred this year, which a competent GM probably doesn't sit on their hands as much as Kevin Adams did this previous offseason as well. And there is fault there, of course, but one that understands now that I don't know if he's necessarily in the hot seat, but that's for reasons outside of performance. I think that's just more of an unfortunate side effect of being a team owned by the Pagulas where they are in the NHL financially and everything of that nature. But overall, Kevin Adams needs to approach this offseason coming up with an understanding that you have options out there right now that truly feel like they can be the next step for this roster that you have locked up significantly and can get them to that next tier, which is playoffs, which is playing a team game that will be successful and find success in a season to the point to get you to the playoffs. A Craig Berube, a reunion with Lindy Ruff, all of these individuals, I do believe, and I think others believe, and I would imagine Kevin Adams needs to look at and approach as individuals who could take over for Don Granato and make something happen. What I will add is a big error was trusting Don Granato's staff to be adequate enough as well when it comes to special teams and aspects of that nature, because the other major sore of issue with this team was last year's power play was great. I think Tage Thompson, of course, exploding and being what he was with the 1T and everything on that off wing was a lot for the power play. Teams, of course, teed off on that eventually, but yet they were still finding scoring elsewhere. This year, it was incompetent. I mean, no one on the ice looked comfortable on a power play ever. When you have a man advantage, you should never look like how the Sabres looked all season. It's never, at no point did it feel like the Sabres had any idea on what they were trying to achieve with their power play. And quite frankly, I think it all starts with design, because this whole I don't mind hitting with a head of speed and doing all of that nature the way they did it in an organization way where just for example, you'd have Dahlin coming up, hit a drop pass as Tage takes a couple strides. He can enter the zone, puck on stick, and then try to throw it to a man sitting on the blue line. From there, that individual can take it, put it deep, and or swing it across, and then try to set up. Theoretically, that sounds like something that could work. It's just game after game, week after week, you saw it not. And it was clear as day that it was so ineffective and easy to defend against that you need to do something to change it. And unfortunately, no one was willing to change it. Matt Ellis, working the power play and special teams, had the inability to want to adjust and adapt when what he was watching in front of him, what we were all watching in front of us, was clearly not working. And these are all just points where it's like you let a guy like Michael Pekka go and be an assistant with the Rangers. And the Rangers are finding success on the power play, of course. Now they have great players. but it's not like the Sabres have bums on their top unit either. Are they Chris Kreider and Zibanejad and Adam Fox and all of this? Maybe, maybe not. I'm going to lean towards the maybe not as a whole. But when you have Dahlin, when you have Tage, when you have Tuck, when you have these guys, you shouldn't be completely ineffective on the power play and look lost every single time you find yourself on one. So these factors just stack up, and it's just a glaring issue that if Kevin Adams, if Terry Pagula, who we know likes to get involved as well, if they truly want to evaluate things and look at it where it's like, what can we do to truly make a difference with this roster first? And whereas last offseason, it did feel like bringing a goaltender, a true number one to help with Levi's development, which, by the way, if they would have gone down that path, we would have never seen this UPL. I genuinely believe that. I believe by them leaning on this and going with this situation, eventually UPL found his own. Eventually UPL looked like a true number one like he is. That's great. But when last year it felt like you needed that, maybe bring in a top 6 veteran forward and not truly just run it back with what you have, and or bring in a guy that could make you at least go 3 lines deep of true kind of top 6 forward feel, whatever it is, get some more depth scoring, whatnot. Sure up the blue line. They tried to do it with the blue line, although what they did with Clifton and Eric Johnson, um, poof. But sitting on the hands, doing that, that was what worked or appeared to be the thing last year. This year, the number one thing to me that needs to be looked at by Terry and Kevin Adams is coaching. And I hope that others see it as well. I imagine others see it as well that are listening to this. I respect Don Granato for what he did in taking the roster and this organization from where it was as Ralph Kruger left and brought it to a place where we could even dream once again about playoffs. Feels way too long from that. But he's just hit a point, no disrespect to him, where it's, I don't truly believe he can bring this team any further. I think tactical reasons, game preparedness, and understanding how to play a true, true full ice game defensively as well as offensively. Although, real quick, I do think the team defense, for the most part, other than take away the slow starts, take away the 4 goals from the Senators, the 3 goals from the Red Wings, things like that. Slow starts are one topic, right? I think that's a little bit separate. I think UPL's success in front of net has come from somewhat of a better identity defensively from the forwards as well as defensemen as a unit when on the ice. I think there is some cause for effect to that, but it still wasn't good enough, of course. And I just think he plays into the hand of having the team ready the way he does, that it just cannot get this roster, get this team over that hump anymore. And they need to address it with something that clearly proves itself to be someone that can get rosters over the hump. And I think Berube, Lindy Ruff, and there are, I'm sure, others out there as well, are proven individuals that can make that happen. And honestly, at this point, it feels like those guys would be willing to take this on, because I don't think the Sabres are what you would call a non-desirable job. I'm not calling them an overly desirable job. I think it's small market, of course. You have your restrictions, it feels like, with ownership and money. It's not like they're going to be splashing cash left and right and supporting you at every step of the way. I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between Terry and the Sabres organization as a whole. But I think, a Craig Berube would look at what's there. He's familiar with Tage as a prospect, just to kind of isolate one little thing. But they would look at this team, look at this roster, look at the youth. I mean, the blue line, your top 4, Dahlin, Power, Samuelson, and Bo Byram. Those are all 23 or younger. There is still so much room to grow for that blue line. And your forwards, they're not getting any younger, but they're still young enough where you can mold them, shape them, teach them how to play a true game and get them better prepared night in, night out for successful game plans, for a successful game, and win when needed to get over that hump and make playoffs. So I really, truly believe that the point of this episode and the point of my frustration with the Sabres being officially eliminated from the playoffs stems from coaching. And that is the number one topic that we will have going to the offseason. I appreciate everyone for stopping by. Like I mentioned, this is going to be a quicker episode. I am dealing with a little bit of throat thing, obviously cough stuff. I apologize about that once more. Please be sure to subscribe to the channel and everything like that. Josh and I both love doing our Bills content and everything of that nature. I love talking Sabres. I'm going to try, furthermore, to provide Sabres content even as we get into the offseason. I'll even talk about NHL playoffs. Might even dive into a little bit of betting at that point in time. All of that fun stuff. I love talking hockey, even with the Sabres going into now a 13 season drought. It's one of those things where it's still a sport that is close to my heart, is the closest to my heart, and I will forever follow it. And the Sabres are my team. At the end of the day, it's going to be tough to sleep tonight, just, with the finality of the season that it is. But we love this team for a reason. And thank you, everyone, for listening and stuff like that. Be sure to leave a comment on how you're feeling at this point. Listening to this episode, what you were experiencing last night, whatever it might be. Like the video if you appreciate and want to live in the depression or frustration or whatever emotion you want to call it of this Sabre season officially being over when it comes to playoffs. And comment how you're feeling. Comment what you think. Comment if you if you think Don Granato really is the guy. If you do, I would love to hear what you have to say about it and why you think they should be moving forward with him. I genuinely mean that. Be sure to follow me on Twitter. I'm sure I'll be having that discussion on Twitter sphere. Anyone that comments or likes to interact on there, I love to try to set aside and have discussions there as well. Appreciate everyone. I am Luka. This is Sabres Chat. You all have a great rest of your day. I know it sucks that the Sabres aren't in it, but soon enough, the Stanley Cup playoffs will be here. They'll be over. We'll know who the champion is. And the great thing about the NHL is it turns around quick, and we'll be in October. We'll be excited again about the season going. And hopefully things can change next year. But not going to hold my breath on that one. Everyone take care. See ya.